Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be looking at this thing called soul fuel. Have you heard of it?
I have, yeah.
I broke around their website, kind of getting a feel for what they're all about. And honestly, some of this stuff is super intriguing.
Yeah.
Like right off the bat, they've got these stats that just kind of blew me away.
Okay.
Like, did you know that in 2024 alone, soul fuel resources were downloaded almost 3 times a day on average?
Wow.
And they reached people in 37 different countries.
That's a pretty big reach.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty impressive.
It sounds like they're tapping into something that a lot of people are searching for.
That's what I was thinking. So I guess my big question is, what is soul fuel all about, really?
Yeah.
They talk about equipping people to live with purpose. They mention finding spirit-led answers and this thing called Chazon.
Jawzone.
I'm totally hooked, but I need some help unpacking all of this.
Yeah, I'm with you. One thing that jumps out at me when I see Soul Fuel and what they're doing is it seems like they're addressing this real hunger people have for something deeper.
Yeah.
It's more than just happiness. It's this lasting satisfaction. So let's dive in.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Soul Fuel's mission is to lead people to become fully devoted followers of Christ. And they're very upfront about that's the driving force behind everything they do.
Yeah, and that phrase fully devoted, that's an interesting choice of words. It makes you
Yeah.
think, what does it really look like to be fully devoted, in everyday life? Not just saying you are.
Yeah, that's a great question. And they connect that idea of devotion with living with purpose. One of their taglines is, everyone ends up somewhere, but few people end up somewhere on purpose.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, it's kind of a wake-up call.
It is. It really is. It kind of reminds me of that feeling that a lot of us get where you feel like you're just drifting, right?
Yeah.
Versus actually charting a course.
Right.
Soul Fuel defines living with purpose as a biblically grounded plan to understand God's calling and live it out daily.
Okay.
So it's not just about having some vague idea. It's like, no, this is a plan.
Right.
This is an actual action plan.
Yeah. And to really drive home that point about having a plan, they quote Proverbs 29.18, where there is no vision, it says, the people perish. That's a pretty strong statement.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah, it is.
It is intense, but I think it speaks to the importance of having that vision. Without it, we just kind of flounder around.
Right. So how do they propose people go about finding this vision, finding this purpose? It's one thing to say we need it, but how do we actually discover it?
Well, and that's where I think it gets really interesting. They talk about finding spirit-led answers to those big life questions we all have, the questions about our purpose and who we are. And it seems like it's not just like a self-help plan,
Right.
It's the spiritual component.
So what would you say makes an answer spirit-led as opposed to just figuring things out on our own?
That's a great question. And honestly, I think it's something we're going to need to unpack a little bit more. But it seems like they're saying, hey, having a relationship with God, that's the foundation for discovering your purpose.
So it's more than just setting goals and, kind of achieving them. It's about this connection to something bigger than yourself.
I think so, yeah. And it ties back to their emphasis on this lasting satisfaction.
Right.
Rather than that cultural obsession with fleeting happiness.
I was going to say that contrast really struck me. It's like they're saying, hey, there's more to life than just chasing the next high or
Okay.
buying the next thing.
Totally. And you got to wonder, what are the downsides of always chasing that fleeting happiness, right? Like, what are we missing?
Yeah, are we getting distracted from something deeper?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So that deeper satisfaction, would you say, comes from aligning your life with your purpose, aligning your life with God's plan.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's what they're getting at. It's about more than just feeling good in the moment. It's about that sense of purpose that really fulfills you.
And it's not just about internal fulfillment either, right? Soul Fuel talks about unlocking potential, helping people grow as followers of Christ and use their gifts to have a positive impact on the world.
Yeah, it's not just about you. It's about taking those gifts and doing something with them.
Right. So they're combining personal growth with outward action. It's
Yeah.
not just sitting in a corner
Yeah.
meditating on your purpose. It's about living it out.
Absolutely. It's about letting your faith inspire you to actually get out there and do something. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, you mentioned this word chazon earlier.
Yeah.
What is that all about?
Well, chazon, it's a Hebrew word for vision. And Soul Fuel uses it to describe God's unique dream for each person. It's like God has this blueprint, right?
Okay.
And it's filled with all the things that he wants for you to experience and achieve. So hold on. It's not just about me figuring out what I want to do with my life. It's about tapping into God's vision for me.
Yeah, and that's what I think makes it so powerful. It takes the focus off of us and our very limited perspective.
Right.
And it opens us up to this much grander vision, one that God himself has designed.
So I'm starting to see why they use that term.
Yeah.
Honestly, though, the idea of God having a specific dream, for me,
Yeah.
it feels kind of intimidating.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like, where do I even begin to try and uncover that?
Well, and that's where I think Soul Fuel is trying to come alongside people and help them.
Okay.
You know, you mentioned their website, their blog, their podcast. Did you get a sense of what kind of content they offer?
Yeah, they have a ton of stuff. Their podcast, Huddle Up, it seems like a really accessible way to kind of get a taste of their teaching.
Yeah.
Their blog covers a wide range of topics like, figuring out your spiritual gifts, navigating relationships, dealing with setbacks, even practical tips for just living more intentionally.
So it's not all just this big picture Chazone stuff.
No, it's very practical.
It's helping people apply their faith.
And get this, they have this whole section of free resources with downloadable guides, workbooks, even some video content.
Wow.
So it's like they're giving you concrete tools to put these ideas into practice.
I love that. I think that's so smart because, it's one thing to talk about finding purpose and spirit-led answers, but actually having something to work with.
Yeah.
It makes it way less overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think that's key to what Soul Fuel is doing. They're not just about inspiring you. They're about equipping you with the tools to actually live out your faith.
Yeah, they're saying, okay, here's the knowledge, here's some resources, now go out and do something amazing.
Right. And they don't just leave you to figure it out on your own either. They also emphasize the importance of community. Remember those life groups we talked about?
Oh, yeah. How do those fit into the picture?
Well, from what I understand, there's small groups that meet regularly to study the Bible, talk about their faith, support each other on their journeys.
It's like a microcosm of their bigger vision,
Right.
creating that space for people to connect.
That makes sense. It provides a more personal environment, I think,
Yeah.
where people can actually process these big ideas.
Yeah, you need that. You need people to process with.
I bet those life groups play a big role in helping people discover and live out their Chazone as well.
I would think so. Having that support system to cheer you on, hold you accountable, help you see your potential.
Right. And speaking of potential, remember how Soul Fuel talks about unlocking potential as people grow in their faith?
Oh, yeah.
How does that tie into discovering and living out your Chazone?
I think they're really connected, It seems like Soul Fuel believes that as you get closer to God and understand his purpose for you,
Yeah.
your potential just naturally unfolds. It's not about, forcing yourself into some mold. It's about discovering your God-given gifts, the unique talents that he's given you. Right.
And then using them to make a difference.
So discovering your Chazone, in a way, fuels that personal growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It gives you a direction to move in. It motivates you. It's like suddenly you have a reason to step outside your comfort zone and develop your skills and pursue the things that really matter to you.
That is exciting, but I'll admit it's also a little daunting,
I get it.
It can feel overwhelming to think about finding my purpose, let alone God's dream for me.
It is a big concept.
Wow.
But remember, Soul Fuel talks about those spirit-led answers.
Right.
That guidance that comes through prayer, through studying the Bible, through listening to your heart.
So it's not all on me to figure it out.
You got it. There's an element of surrender involved.
Okay.
That trust that God will reveal his plan when the time is right.
But it's not passive either.
No, you hit it right on the head. There's a balance.
Okay.
Soul Fuel would probably encourage people to take practical steps.
Like exploring your interests, identifying your strengths, thinking about how you can serve others.
So it's about combining that inner guidance from God
Yes,
with outward action in the real world.
absolutely. And I think that's where things get really exciting, when you find that sweet spot where your God-given gifts and your heart's desires line up.
I love that. It's not about forcing yourself into some mold.
Right.
It's about discovering the unique way God has designed you to make a difference.
You got it. But let's be real, this whole living with purpose Chazone thing, it's not always sunshine and roses.
Right, exactly.
And I think Soul Fuel acknowledges that.
Okay.
They're not pretending that it's always easy. In fact, they seem to embrace the challenges, as opportunities for growth.
So it's not about avoiding hardship or pretending everything's perfect.
No, it's recognizing that you grow the most when you're going through challenges.
Hmm.
It's when you're being stretched and tested
that you discover how strong and resilient you really are.
And that's probably where the support of those life groups really comes in handy, right?
Oh, absolutely. Having people to lean on.
To encourage you when you're down, to celebrate with you when you have victories.
Yeah. And it's not just about human support, is it? Soul Fuel emphasizes grace and forgiveness as essential parts of the journey as well.
You know, that's so important because they're not setting up some impossible standard. You know, they're reminding us that we're all human. We're going to mess up.
Right.
And it's okay. You know, God's love is unconditional and he meets us right where we are.
That's so reassuring, especially for those who are feeling lost or overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You know, it takes the pressure off of trying to be perfect
Totally.
and allows you to lean into faith.
That's exactly what they're saying.
Yeah.
Lean into it and trust in God's leading.
As we've been talking, I keep thinking about how much their approach resonates with that longing we all have. You know, that deep longing for purpose, for something more than just going through the motions.
I think you're right. It speaks to that desire that we all have to make a difference, to leave the world a little bit better than we found it.
Yeah.
And Soul Fuel connects that desire to something even bigger. You know, a divine purpose.
It's like they're saying, don't just live your life, discover your mission.
Yeah, that's good. And that mission, you know, it's not about, you know, climbing some corporate ladder or becoming famous or whatever.
Right.
It's about aligning yourself with God's plan
Right.
and contributing to something that's way bigger than yourself.
Which brings us back to that idea of lasting satisfaction.
Yeah, full
It's
start.
not about chasing that fleeting happiness. It's about finding that deeper fulfillment that comes from living in alignment with God's purpose for you.
And it's not dependent on your job title or how much money you make or any of those things.
Yeah.
It's that deep internal sense of peace and joy and purpose
Yeah.
that comes from knowing you're living the life you were created to live.
That's beautiful. So as we kind of wrap up this part of our deep dive, what stands out to you the most about Soul Fuel's approach?
I think it's the holistic aspect of it. It's not just about, you know, your own personal transformation.
Right.
And it's not just about going out and trying to change the world. It's both.
Yeah.
You know, they bring those things together to create a life that's both meaningful and fulfilling. And they do it in a way that's super accessible. You know, they're not trying to make it complicated.
I agree. And their focus on that lasting satisfaction, I think it's so important, especially today.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they're offering an alternative
Totally.
to that constant chase.
Yeah. It's a different path, for sure.
It is. And I think it leads to a much deeper sense of purpose and belonging.
I agree. So as we kind of wrap up here, I just keep coming back to that question, you know? If Chazon is God's dream for your life, what steps can you take to discover it? What are you passionate about, you know? What gets you fired up? What gifts has God given you? And how can you use those gifts to make a difference?
Those are powerful questions
They are.
for each of us to think about. And honestly, if you're intrigued by what you've heard today, I'd really encourage you to check out Soul Fuel. Explore their website, maybe listen to an episode of their podcast, or even connect with a life group in your area.
You never know what you'll discover.
Right. Who knows what you might discover about yourself and God's dream for your life.
It's an invitation, you know, an invitation to a journey of growth and purpose and lasting satisfaction. And that's a journey I think is worth taking.
So we talked a lot about this idea of Chazon, God's dream for each person, but how do you actually take that beautiful vision and make it a reality?
Yeah, it's one thing to have the dream. It's another to live it out,
Right?
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What are the steps? You know,
Yeah.
what does Soul Fuel suggest?
Well, it seems like they take this multifaceted approach.
Okay.
You know, we talked about the resources, their blog, the podcast, all those downloadable guides, workbooks.
Right, right.
So I think that's a good starting point. You get that inspiration, but then you also get those practical tools and exercises.
Right, so it's not just a bunch of fluffy encouragement.
No.
They actually
yeah.
give you something concrete to work with.
Exactly. Did you come across any specific examples of how they bridge that gap between, you know, inspiration and action?
I think their emphasis on life groups is a great example of that.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know, it's easy to kind of get lost in these big abstract ideas.
Right.
But being part of a supportive community,
Yeah.
I think that provides some accountability and encouragement
Oh, absolutely.
to actually put what you're learning into practice.
You need that.
What about this idea of unlocking potential? How did that fit into discovering and living out your Chezon?
I think those two things are really interconnected. It seems like Soul Fuel believes that the closer you get to God,
Yeah.
the more you understand his purpose for you,
Yeah.
the more your potential is unlocked, the more you blossom.
So discovering your Chezon almost fuels that personal growth.
Totally. It gives you direction. It motivates you. Suddenly you have a reason to develop your skills,
Yeah.
to step outside your comfort zone, and to pursue the things that you're truly passionate about.
I love that. It's not about, trying to fit into some mold.
Right.
It's about becoming the best version of yourself
Yes.
in alignment with God's vision. But, let's be honest, this whole finding your purpose Chezon thing,
Yeah.
it can be kind of overwhelming.
It's a lot. Where do you even begin?
That's the question.
Right. Well, I think this is where those spirit-led answers come in, remember.
Right.
Soul Fuel really encourages seeking guidance through prayer,
Yeah.
through studying the Bible, through listening to that still, small voice inside. It's about cultivating that relationship with God and trusting him
Yeah.
to reveal his plan.
When the time is right.
Exact.
I can see how that would take some of the pressure off.
Yeah,
You're not trying to do it all on your own.
absolutely. But it's not passive either.
Right.
There's a balance.
Hmm.
I think Soul Fuel would also encourage taking some practical steps.
Okay.
Like, explore your interests.
Mm.
What are you good at?
Right.
And how can you use those things to serve others?
So combining that inner guidance with some outward action.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where your gifts
Yeah.
and your passions
Right.
align with God's purpose for you.
That's where the magic happens.
I think so.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Soul Fuel, what stands out to you the most about their approach?
Honestly, I think it's their emphasis on holistic growth. It's not just about, transforming yourself or
Yeah.
going out and, making a big impact on the world.
Yeah.
It's both. They bring those things together to create a life
Yeah.
that's both meaningful and fulfilling.
And they do it in a way that's really accessible.
Yeah, very down to earth.
Yeah. And their focus on that lasting satisfaction instead of just chasing happiness.
Yeah.
I think that's so important, especially in our world today.
Totally.
They're offering a different path, a path that leads to,
A deeper kind of joy
a much deeper sense of joy and purpose.
and belonging, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into Soul Fuel. It's been a really fascinating exploration.
My pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
And for those of you listening, if you're feeling that tug, that longing for something more,
Yeah.
I encourage you to check out Soul Fuel for yourselves. Explore their website, give their podcast a listen, connect with a life group.
You never know what you might discover.
Who knows what you might discover about yourself and God's dream for your life. And until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep living with purpose.